Imagine living an ordinary life, drawing water, tending your family, and expecting tomorrow to be just like today. Then, without warning, everything changes. A being unlike any human you've ever seen appears before you. He is majestic, powerful, and seemingly from heaven itself. Before long, your life is no longer your own. You become the wife of one of the mysterious watchers. The world around you begins to change, and soon you give birth to children unlike anything the earth has ever known. Their existence will shake the foundations of humanity and set in motion events that lead to one of the greatest judgments in history. Most people know what happened to the giants. Many have heard about the punishment of the fallen angels. But almost no one asks one haunting question. What became of the women who married them? Did they perish in the flood? Were they judged alongside their supernatural husbands? Or did God have a completely different fate waiting for them? The Book of Enoch offers a mysterious answer that has puzzled readers for centuries, and it's a part of the story that many people have never heard. Stay with me until the very end, because the fate of these women may be even more tragic and more surprising than the punishment of the watchers themselves. Long before the world was overwhelmed by violence and corruption, there was a time when the earth was very different. Humanity was multiplying, families were growing, and life followed the natural order established by God. But beyond what human eyes could see, another realm existed, a heavenly realm filled with powerful spiritual beings created to serve the Almighty. According to the Book of Enoch, among these heavenly beings was a group known as the Watchers. They were not ordinary angels. They had been entrusted with a sacred responsibility to observe humanity and carry out the duties God had assigned to them. Their purpose was never to interfere with human life or pursue their own desires. They were meant to remain faithful to their Creator. But everything changed when they looked upon the daughters of men. The Book of Enoch tells us that these women were beautiful, and the Watchers became consumed by a desire that was never meant to exist within them. What began as a glance soon became temptation. Temptation grew into obsession, and obsession led to open rebellion against God. Leading them was Shemhaza, who feared that the others might lose their courage and leave him to bear the consequences alone. So he proposed something that would bind them together forever. He urged them to swear a solemn oath that none of them would turn back, no matter the cost. Standing together on the summit of Mount Hermon, around 200 watchers made a covenant to carry out their plan. In that moment, there was no hesitation. There was no voice of repentance. They chose to abandon their heavenly calling for forbidden desire, crossing a boundary that God had never permitted any heavenly being to cross. What may have seemed like a single decision made by a small group of rebellious angels would soon unleash consequences far beyond anything they could have imagined. That one forbidden choice would reshape human history, corrupt the earth, and leave scars that generations would never forget. Now we come to one of the most overlooked parts of this ancient story, the women themselves. When people talk about the Book of Enoch, the conversation almost always centers on the Watchers, the Nephilim, or the coming flood. Yet the women who became the wives of these heavenly beings are rarely mentioned, even though their lives were changed forever. So who were they? According to the Book of Enoch and the account in Genesis 6, they were not queens or rulers. They were not sorceresses with supernatural powers. They were not angels disguised as humans. They were simply the daughters of men, ordinary human women living ordinary lives. They had families. They had hopes for the future. They likely expected to marry human husbands, raise children, and live out their lives like everyone else around them. Nothing in the text suggests they were seeking out heavenly beings or trying to become part of something extraordinary. Then the Watchers descended from heaven. Having abandoned the purpose God had given them, these rebellious heavenly beings chose wives for themselves. The Book of Enoch says they took women and married them, beginning relationships that were never part of God's design. These unions crossed the boundary between the heavenly and human realms, setting in motion events that would affect the entire world. But this is where the story becomes deeply mysterious. The Book of Enoch tells us what the Watchers did, but it says very little about what the women were thinking or feeling. That silence has led readers to ask difficult questions for centuries. Were these women deceived by beings who appeared glorious and powerful? Were they frightened, believing they had no choice but to obey? Did some willingly accept these heavenly visitors, unaware of the consequences their decision would bring? Or did they truly understand who these beings were and what their union would mean for the future of humanity? The truth is, the Book of Enoch doesn't answer every one of these questions. It leaves important details unstated, which is why scholars and readers have reached different conclusions. Some see the women primarily as victims of the Watchers' rebellion. Others believe at least some may have cooperated willingly. The text itself does not fully resolve the mystery, and it's important not to claim more than it says. What we do know is that once these marriages took place, nothing would ever be the same. The lives of these ordinary women became intertwined with one of the greatest acts of rebellion described in ancient Jewish tradition, and the consequences would extend far beyond their own generation. So consider this for a moment. If a heavenly being appeared before you, radiant, powerful, and claiming authority from above, would you immediately recognize deception, or might you mistake it for a blessing? That question may be more relevant today than it first appears. The marriages between the Watchers and human women marked a turning point in history. What began as a forbidden union soon produced something the world had never seen before. According to the Book of Enoch, these women gave birth to extraordinary offspring known as the Nephilim. These were not ordinary children. They grew into giants, beings of immense size and terrifying strength. Their very existence represented a crossing of boundaries that God had never intended. At first, their unusual nature may have inspired awe. Imagine a mother holding her newborn child, unaware of what he would one day become. Like any parent, she may have hoped for a peaceful future, never imagining that the child in her arms would grow into a figure remembered for violence and destruction. But as the years passed, the Nephilim continued to grow. Their strength surpassed that of ordinary men. Their appetites became enormous. According to the Book of Enoch, they consumed the produce of the earth until it could no longer sustain them. Fields were emptied. Harvests disappeared. The resources that once supported humanity were no longer enough. Then came the breaking point. When there was no more food to satisfy their hunger, the giants turned against humanity. The Book of Enoch describes a world descending into chaos as violence spread across the earth. Bloodshed became common and fear replaced peace. The corruption that had begun with the rebellion of the Watchers was now consuming human society itself. Yet the corruption did not end with violence. The Book of Enoch also says that the Watchers revealed forbidden knowledge to humanity, knowledge that God had not appointed them to teach. Among the teachings mentioned are the making of weapons for war, the crafting of ornaments and cosmetics, enchantments, sorcery, astrology, and the reading of heavenly signs. Instead of guiding humanity toward righteousness, these teachings accelerated moral and spiritual corruption. The earth was no longer merely inhabited by sinful people. According to the Book of Enoch, it had become overwhelmed by violence, deception, and rebellion. Every generation was now feeling the consequences of a decision made by a small group of fallen heavenly beings. But perhaps the greatest tragedy belonged to the mothers. Imagine watching your child grow stronger with each passing year, only to realize that his strength brings terror instead of protection. Imagine hearing stories of cities living in fear, families fleeing for their lives, and innocent people suffering because of the very children you once held in your arms. Whether these women understood what would happen or not, they witnessed the heartbreaking results of those forbidden unions. The children they had carried and nurtured became symbols of a world spiraling toward judgment. And as corruption spread across the earth, one truth became impossible to ignore. God had seen everything. The cries of the oppressed were rising to heaven, and divine judgment was drawing near. But before that judgment fell, another question remained unanswered. What would become of the mothers when God finally acted? For a moment, set aside the giants, the fallen angels, and the coming judgment. Instead, imagine seeing this story through the eyes of one of these women. Perhaps she once dreamed of a simple life, a home, a family, and children who would grow up in peace. But nothing about her life turned out the way she expected. Her husband was no ordinary man. According to the Book of Enoch, he was one of the Watchers, a heavenly being who had abandoned his place in God's order. What may have first appeared glorious or awe-inspiring had now become something far more troubling. Then there were the children. The little boy she once carried in her arms did not remain an ordinary child. He grew larger, stronger, and more fearsome with every passing year. Wherever he went, people stared. Eventually, they didn't just stare, they ran. Entire communities lived in fear of the Nephilim. The giants' violence spread across the land, and no one could stop them. Imagine hearing the cries of terrified families, knowing that your own son was part of the reason the world had become so dangerous. Now imagine the weight of that realization. Every mother hopes her children will bring hope into the world. But these women watched as their children became associated with suffering, destruction, and fear. Whether they understood how things would end or not, they could not escape the consequences unfolding before their eyes. Then came the announcement that changed everything. According to the Book of Enoch, God had seen the corruption covering the earth. The violence, the bloodshed, and the rebellion had reached heaven itself. Judgment would no longer be delayed. The flood was coming. Not to cleanse one village, not to destroy one family, but to wash away a world consumed by corruption. Imagine hearing that news. The home you built, the people you loved, the future you imagined. Everything was about to disappear beneath the waters of judgment. At this point, it's worth pausing to consider something the Book of Enoch does not fully explain. It tells us about the rebellion of the Watchers and the rise of the Nephilim, but it gives only limited details about the inner thoughts and choices of the women involved. Were they deceived by beings of overwhelming power? Did some act willingly? Were their experiences different from one another? The text leaves these questions open, and we should be careful not to claim certainty where it remains silent. What we can say is that their lives became deeply tragic. Whether they were victims, willing participants, or somewhere in between, they found themselves caught in a rebellion they could not control and facing a judgment that would change the course of history forever. But even as the flood approached, one mystery still remained. What would God do with the women after the judgment of the Watchers began? The answer found in the Book of Enoch is both mysterious and deeply unsettling, and it brings us to the role of the Archangel Michael. As the corruption on the earth reached its peak, the Book of Enoch tells us that God did not allow the rebellion to continue unchecked. The cries of humanity had risen to heaven, and the time for divine judgment had arrived. But God did not carry out this judgment all at once through a single messenger. Instead, according to the Book of Enoch, he commissioned his mighty archangels, each with a specific assignment. Raphael was commanded to deal with Azazel, one of the chief leaders of the rebellion. Azazel was bound and cast into a desolate place, where he would remain until the final judgment. His punishment reflected the seriousness of leading humanity into corruption. Gabriel received a different mission. He was sent to confront the Nephilim and bring an end to the violence they had spread across the earth. The giants, whose strength had once seemed unstoppable, would not escape God's justice. Then there was Michael. The Book of Enoch describes Michael as being entrusted with acting against Shemhaza and the other rebellious Watchers. These heavenly beings who had abandoned their calling were bound and reserved for judgment because they had crossed a boundary God had never permitted them to cross. The very power they had once used in rebellion could not save them from the authority of their Creator. At this point, it might seem as though every part of the story has reached its conclusion. The Watchers are imprisoned. The giants are destroyed. The flood is about to cleanse the earth. But one question still remains. What about the women? This is where the Book of Enoch becomes especially mysterious. Later in the text, particularly in 1 Enoch 19, Enoch describes seeing female figures connected with the rebellion of the Watchers. The passage has long been debated because it is brief and difficult to interpret. It speaks of women associated with the fallen angels in a state linked with sorrow and lamentation, but it does not clearly explain every detail of their condition or exactly how they came to be in that state. Because of this, readers and scholars have reached different conclusions over the centuries. Some understand the passage to describe a unique judgment connected to the women involved with the Watchers. Others believe it is symbolic or should be read in a different way. The Book of Enoch itself does not provide a complete explanation, so we should be careful not to go beyond what the text actually says. Even so, one thing is clear. Their story did not simply disappear beneath the waters of the flood. While history remembers the rebellion of the Watchers and the destruction of the giants, the fate of these women remained one of the most haunting mysteries preserved in the Book of Enoch. Their story lingered as a sobering reminder that the consequences of rebellion extended far beyond those who first chose it. And perhaps that is what makes this account so unforgettable. It is not only a story about divine judgment, it is also a story about lives forever changed by choices that reached far beyond a single generation. At first glance, this may seem like nothing more than an ancient story about angels, giants, and a world that existed before the flood. But if that's all we see, we may miss the deeper message the Book of Enoch is trying to convey. The rebellion of the Watchers did not begin with violence. It began with a choice. Before there were giants, before there was bloodshed, and before the earth was filled with corruption, there was a moment when created beings chose to abandon the boundaries God had established. What followed was a chain of consequences that affected not only them but countless others who had never made that original decision. That pattern should make us stop and reflect. Spiritual deception rarely presents itself as something obviously evil. More often, it appears attractive, convincing, or even beneficial. In the Book of Enoch, the Watchers did not simply rebel. They introduced knowledge that God had not authorized them to give. According to the text, they taught humanity things that contributed to violence, corruption, and moral decline. The lesson is not that knowledge itself is wrong, but that wisdom separated from God's guidance can be destructive rather than life-giving. The story also reminds us that disobedience is never isolated. One decision can shape a family. A family's choices can influence a community, and the actions of one generation can leave lasting consequences for those who come after them. That is one of the most sobering themes running through the Book of Enoch. The rebellion of a relatively small group of Watchers eventually affected human society on a massive scale. Whether we read the Book of Enoch as ancient religious literature that expands on Genesis or as a historical tradition preserved outside the biblical canon, its warning remains remarkably consistent. Crossing the boundaries God has established leads to consequences that extend far beyond the person making the choice. Perhaps the greatest lesson is this: God's boundaries are not meant to limit us, they are meant to protect us. When those boundaries are rejected, the effects are rarely confined to one individual. Families, communities, and even future generations can feel the impact. That ancient warning is just as relevant today as it was in the days before the flood. Thousands of years have passed, yet the wives of the Watchers remain among the most mysterious figures in ancient religious literature. Their names have been lost to history. Their voices were never recorded. We are left only with fragments of their story and the haunting questions those fragments continue to raise. Were they deceived by powerful heavenly beings beyond their understanding? Did some knowingly cross a forbidden boundary? Or were their experiences far more complex than we can fully grasp today? The Book of Enoch does not answer every question, and perhaps that is why this story continues to fascinate readers centuries later. What it does offer is a solemn warning. It reminds us that rebellion against God is never without consequence. Choices made in a single moment can echo through families, generations, and even history itself. At the same time, it challenges us to approach difficult passages with humility, recognizing where the text speaks clearly and where it leaves room for thoughtful reflection. Now I'd love to hear from you. Do you believe the wives of the Watchers were innocent victims, willing participants, or somewhere in between? Share your thoughts respectfully in the comments below. I'd love to read your perspective and continue the conversation with you. If you enjoyed exploring this mystery from the Book of Enoch and want to dive deeper into biblical history, the Watchers, the Nephilim, ancient prophecies, and the hidden stories behind Scripture, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss our next journey into these fascinating topics. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, keep seeking truth, keep studying the Scriptures with wisdom and discernment, and may God bless you.